Hello there. This is a a hands-on tutorial video on how to create and deploy a hop-based web application using the hop command line too. So before we start with the meaty part, you have to fulfill a few requirements. Firstly, to run the hop command line 2, you need two dependencies. The first one is Babashka, which is a small closure interpreter. It will be used to run our CLI. And the second one is OpenSSL, which the command to requires to do cryptographic operations, such as generate self-signed SSL certificates. So to install Babashka, we recommend that you go to its GitHub page and you follow the guideline to install Babashka in your operating system of choice. And secondly, for OpenSSL, we have two examples for Debian, Ubuntu, and Mac OS. If your operating system is not one of those, I think it's a very common tool. So it's very straightforward to find in the web how to install it in your operating system. So once you have installed those two dependencies, the next part is to actually get our hop CLI. Okay, to do that, you need to go to this link in the documentation to our GitHub page. This is the release page. Here we distribute the hop CLI as a jar. So you need to download this jar and put somewhere where you can reference it later. For this tutorial, we recommend that you put it in a place where you are going to generate the new project, so it's easy to follow the tutorial. For example, in my case, I will leave the hop CLI jar in the folder where I'm going to generate the project or where I'm going to be working in this tutorial. So just to check that the CLI is working properly, let's just execute hop babashka bb and hop cli.jar. It should shows an output something like this. So you have that now. We can follow to the part of this tutorial, which is generating and deploying our hop-based application. So this application is a full stack. It has a backend and a front end. It is based on the Duct framework, which is a dependency injection framework, and the front end is done with a reagent, which is an interface to React. And we are going to deploy this to AWS Web Services as our cloud provider of choice, and we are going to use GitHub Actions as our provider for the CI and CD pipeline. Okay, so before we can start actually generating the project, we need a few things. First, you will need Docker and Docker Compose installed in your machine. This will be used for running the local development environment. And you will need AWS Vault, which is a tool for managing AWS credentials securely in your local machine. Is not strictly required, but we highly recommend that you use it for this tutorial. And apart from that, the most important one is that you will need a Amazon Web Services account to actually complete this tutorial. Okay, so the next step, well, as you can see, you have to install these tools. We have put them in our documentation in this tutorial. So you can go to their official page and install in your local machine. For Docker and Docker Compose, you have the official pages, and for AWS Vault, you have the GitHub repository documentation, where you can go there and install it in your OS of choice. So once you have done that, we can really start with the fun part, which is actually getting our application and deploying it to AWS. So firstly, what we're gonna do is configure AWS Vault to have a profile so we can use it to execute our commands later to provide or to provision the infrastructure. So for that, as I said, you need a AWS account, and in that AWS account, you will need a user with administrator credentials. So it has enough privileges so we can provision all the infrastructure we need. So once you have that user created in your AM services in AWS account, you will need to add it to your AWS Vault. In my case, I already have it, so I already have my own user. So I'm not going to add it now, but basically you need to type here hop/admin, which is going to be the user I'm going to use for this tutorial. I will use a different one because it's my personal one, but I advise that you use this one for this tutorial. and it will ask you for two pair of credentials, which is, well, sorry, one pair of credentials, which is the access key ID and the access secret key ID, which are the credentials for your you created using AWS. So once you have done that, we can jump to the next step, which is actually configuring the hop CLI command, the hop command line tool to generate the new project. So the hop command line tool, it has a simple configuration which we can copy to our local machine and edit the configuration we want to fit our needs to generate the new project. So you don't have to write everything from scratch because it will take a lot of work, to be honest. So we are going to execute this command, and we are going to copy the sample file to our local machine. So in this case, I will switch to my terminal, and here I will copy the command is this one, and we are going to set the settings file path to this directory with the name settings.eden. So once we do that, okay, the file should be here. Yeah, it's there. And now we are going to edit the file, and for that you can use any text editor of your choice. In my case, I will use Emacs. So this is the settings.eden file. And it can look a bit intimidating if you actually start navigating through it because it's a bit lengthy. But its design is intended for later on in a future release of Hub to be provided through a UI or a kind of wizard, so you don't have to actually manually edit it. So before we can edit the configuration that we need to edit so we can generate our project, I just want to briefly explain how you could navigate the settings EDM file in case you follow this tutorial later by reading the documentation by yourself. So basically, the settings EDM file is a collection, is a vector of maps where each item is a tree-like structure. So in this case, we have this first item, which is a map, which has like a tree-like structure, and each map inside of each nested map is a node. So in this case, this is the, like, we can call it root node, and inside of it, it has other nodes, and this keeps going. So each node has some properties. In this case, we can see it has a tag, which is basically something that we can describe which node this is, like a kind of to tag the node so we know what it is. The type, which can be simple types like strings or passwords, or also complex types, which is in the case of the plain group. And we also see things like single choice group and multiple choice groups. And inside of these plain groups and single choices, you have more nodes to keep building up the configuration. So that's basically the fundamentals of the settings hidden file. So once we have that, we are going to actually configure what we need to do. We need to configure, sorry. And for this tutorial, we are going to take a look at three configuration settings. The first one is the project name. So it's very easy. It's right here. So in this case, we want to change the value to hop tutorial. And the next configuration setting is the profiles we want to use to generate our new project. So in Hub, profiles are basically a collection of features that enhance your new project. For example, you can give it a CI/CD pipeline, you can give it a front end. So it basically enhances your new project, it gives more features. So in this case, we have by default the core profile, which is the bare bones of any hop-based application. And what we're going to do is give it more features. So we want a front end, we want to deploy to AWS, and we also want a CI/CD pipeline. Okay. There are more profiles, but for simplicity's sake, we are going to stick to those and to the end of this tutorial. The CI/CD, there is a tiny detail that CI/CD, we currently provide Bitbucket pipelines and GitHub Actions, and by default it's configured to use GitHub Actions. So that's what we are going to to use in this tutorial, so you don't need to touch anything else. And lastly, but not least, I want to let you know that there is a third configuration setting that you could change, which is if you go to Cloud Provider, line 1412, and go to Account and Region, you can configure which AWS region you're going to deploy or create the AWS resources. We highly recommend that you don't change this and keep using the EU West 1, which is Ireland, because we heavily tested the setup of the tutorial in that region. If you want to change it, you can, but be aware that not all regions of AWS support all its services. So it might be a bit of misbehavior, or things might run different. So we recommend that you keep this setting as it is and don't change it for this tutorial. And so after we have done that, after we have edited the settings.env file, it is time to actually run the command that will generate and provision the infrastructure for our application. So in the documentation here, this is the command. You can copy it, and we are going to analyze it in a second. So I'll go back to my terminal. I copy it here. And so this command, we are basically executing AWS Vault, saying, okay, use this profile to pass the credentials to the environment. That is, we are going to execute the hop CLI with the AWS credentials in the environment. So it has all the privileges necessary to create resources in AWS. And in my case, I will change the profile to my personal one, but you should keep the one that appears in the documentations if you are following this strictly. And we are going to use the settings file that we just configured, which is in the same directory. And we are going to place, sorry, we can not see it there, but we are going to create the project in the hop-tutorial folder. So if we run this, it will start provisioning the infrastructure and everything else that is required to generate our project. So before we pause in this part, because it will take several minutes, I just want to lay out that this command will basically start provisioning 3 sets of resources in your AWS account. The first one is the resources related to your account. So any hop project can be created and generated and next time in your account without generating a new one. The second set is the project, which will create resources used project-wide. That is, they share these resources in your project. And then the last one are the 2 environments, one for dev and another one for testing. The dev one is not actually AWS resources to run your application in the cloud, but they are resources necessary to run your local application and interact with AWS resources that are in the cloud. And the testing one is actually where we are going to have resources that will be used to run your application in the cloud. After that, after it finishes provisioning the infrastructure, it will print some post-installation messages, some steps that you have to follow, but don't worry, we will do this together. And it will take several minutes, so we are going to pause it here and come back later when it finishes. So see you there. Okay, so we're back, and as you can see, it finished the provisioning of the infrastructure and also the generation of our project in the local environment. So as you can see, there are some few steps that we need to follow in order to complete the installation. The first one that we're going to do is to configure our local development user that will have the required privileges to access the AWS account resources. So to do that, we are going to follow this first step, and we are going to add the hop local dev user. So for that, we are going to use AWS Vault. So we are going to do hop slash sorry, we need to do AWS vault add hub/hub local dev. So it will ask for the access key ID. You might be familiar with this in a previous step, and also for the secret access key. Okay, apart from that, we also need to do other configuration, which is the next step for the AWS Vault to actually work. So what we're going to do is we are going to edit a file that is in your home directory, that is in the .aws/config directory. So for that, I will use a different terminal so we don't lose this content here. So before you do that, don't forget to copy this information because we will have to paste it in that file. So I will move to a different terminal and I will edit it with my text editor, ThemeMax, uh, the .aws/config file. So once here, you might see that you probably have the local hub dev configured, and we also need to add the extra information that the hub CLI uh, printed for us. So in this case, I will put it here. Oops, sorry, I might not have copied properly. Uh, yeah. Okay, so as you can see here now, we have this information here. And once that, save the file. And we are back to the steps. So the next step, which is we are not going to do it now, but keep it, maybe save it somewhere or keep this terminal separated as I'm doing now, so you can reference it easily later. What we're going to do is, in the next step, if we go back to the documentation, is to init our Git repository. So what we're gonna do, I will go back to the terminal, and as you can see here, we have the hop-tutorial folder, which is of the folder of our project. So I will move there, and I will do the command that the documentation is instructing to initialize our repository. So as you can see here, we are initializing the repository with initial branch, which is called main. Ideally, you could choose any branch name you want, but there is a special configuration in our settings indent file which tells which deployment branch we are going to use to deploy our application when doing the CI/CD pipeline. And by default, this branch is main. It is in the settings indent. You can change this if you want. But for the purpose of this tutorial, we are going to use the main, which is the default one, and we are going to uh, keep going with it. So let's initialize the REPL. And next, what we're going to do is do our initial commit. So for that, we are going to add everything, and then we are going to do the git initial commit. Okay. Oops, sorry. All right, so the commit is done. And okay, so we already have everything saved in our local repository, and now we're going to do this run the local development environment. So to do that, there is a script called start-dev.sh. Okay, and the start-dev.sh will basically select the required Docker Compose files to run the project in your local machine and start the whole environment for you. So if we do that, oh, sorry, I have Docker not running on my machine, but now I have. Sorry about that. So let's run it. Start-dev.sh, and this will run the environment. So basically, the environment has two services, which is a reverse proxy, engines, and then the application. So once you see this line where it tells that the end repo for our application is running at the port 4001, You can now use your IDE or text editor of choice. In my case, again, I'm going to use Emacs, and we are going to actually start the application. So in my case, I will connect to the REPL with Emacs, and I will do dev, which is our first step, as you can see in the docs. Okay, and the next one is Go, which will actually start the web server and the entire application system. So yeah, this might take a little bit. Okay, so the web server is running now, port 3000. You have to wait. Okay. All right. So now that it is running, if you see this message here, we can go to browser and navigate to localhost where the application is. In reality, the application is running, the backend is running on port 3000, but we are using Nginx to do a reverse proxy and instead serve the application on port 80. So you can just type localhost and you will navigate to the application. So yeah, so here we are. This is the landing. Basically, this tells you that the application is running. And once we've done that, we are going to stop the develop environment. For that, we also have I will go back to my terminal, and we also have a very nice utility script. It's called stop-dev. It will basically shut down the Docker environment. So if we do that, okay, now everything is shut down. And the next step that we are going to do is to configure our remote repository in GitHub. So I will navigate to GitHub, to my account, and I will create a new repository, which we'll call as our project is called, Hop Tutorial. Um, I will make it public, and here you don't have to configure anything else, just hit create. Okay, so the next step is, please don't ignore this for now, and let's just go to settings. And okay, I will stop here, and if we go back to the docs, basically what we have to do is we need to configure our CI/CD credentials. Why? Because we are going to do the continuous integration, but the continuous delivery part needs AWS credentials to actually deploy our application bundle to AWS. So what we need is to add three secrets, which is AWS Access Key ID and Secret Access Key. The default region is not actually a secret, but is also an information needed in the credentials. And this information, you have it in the previous step when we generated the project, as I told you before, to skip it for now, and is the third step, or well, it's step 2 in this case. And we have to copy this information and add it to GitHub. Okay, so in GitHub, I navigated to settings, and under the security tab, we have the secrets, and inside secrets, we have actions. Okay, in the actions, we have this button here, which is to create a new repository secret. So we do that, and we are going to create three of them. So the first one is going to be access key ID. Okay, and I will copy the value. Okay, okay, first one done. Second, copy. E. Okay, and the third one is the AWS default region. Okay, so the region, this is one. Okay, so now we are done adding the credentials to the repository. And once you've done that, next step is to point our local repository to the remote one. So what we're going to do is go back to our repository's main page, and here you will need the URL for the repository. Okay, so in this case, I'll copy this one, and we are going to run the command git remote add origin, and we will add the URL for our GitHub repository. So you do that. Oops, sorry, I'm not in the folder. Okay, so we'll do this. And once you have done that, the next step is to push our commit to the repository. So if we do git push -u dot origin main, yeah, main. Okay, so if we go back to the repository, yep, everything's here. The pipeline is not running yet for the first time as when we do the commit, but we will do a small change and make it work. Okay, so next step is to actually deploy the application with a little change. So first, what we're going to do is to edit a file in our project, which is in the app src hop tutorial client landing.cljs file. So if I go back to my text editor and I navigate to src hop tutorial client and landing, here what we want to change is line 13, where we say your application is up and running, and here we are going to put something like in AWS and lots of exclamation marks. And after that, we are going to commit this change to GitHub. So what we're going to do is execute these commands. Oops. Okay, so I go back here and add the landing. Sorry, git add. I have a typo in the tutorial folder. Okay, so git landing add, and then we are going to do our commit. And finally, we are going to do git push. Okay. Okay, so once you've done that, you can go back to the CI/CD pipeline, well, to the repository, sorry, and then you can go to the Actions tab here in your repository, and you see that it is running. This is the CI/CD running right now, and you can click here and see the details. And basically, what we is going to do is first lint and format check your project, entire Clojure project, then execute the tests, and then deploy the application. There is also a few checks that I skipped in my explanation. That is, before it does everything that I said, it will also lint all your other files in the project, such as Docker files, shell scripts, and YAML files. So it guarantees that everything that you have in your project is strictly well formatted and also respects their syntax. Okay, so these might take a bit, so we're going to pause here and come back once it finishes. Okay, so looks like it finished. So looks like everything went fine. And now, so the next step is to actually check on AWS that our application was deployed successfully. So if you go to your AWS console and you navigate to Elastic Beanstalk, There you find your application. In my case, I have a lot of them, but should be hub tutorial test if you didn't change your hub project name at the beginning of this tutorial. And you will see that it will be probably deploying your application still. So we need to wait until this health section says it's okay, like a green check. So we have to wait a little bit until it deploys. For me, it looks like it's already deployed, so it should be available in any second. Okay, so as you can see, uh, well, for some reason it's yellow, but yeah, normally should be green. And once that's like this, we can actually access the application. Okay, so for that, in Elastic Beanstalk, you have a URL to access your application. So in this case, mine is this one. So I can just click this, and you find this page, which might be a bit frightening, but I mean, it is just temporary. Uh, when we created the application, we actually created it with a self-signed certificate to get things going. But this is just in the meantime because we cannot automate the process where you use your own real certificate. So you have to do that process manually yourself. So for now, just bear with me and click on advance and then click to proceed to the URL. So in this case, here it is. And here we have our application running and deployed on AWS. So that's all for this tutorial. If you have any question, any doubts, we are in Clojure and Slacks under the Hop channel. And otherwise, you can also go to our website, which is gethop.dev, and there you will find more information about the project. Okay, so thank you for watching and see you around.